The salvage ship drifted through the debris field like a ghost hunting for treasure, and Captain Jake Morrison had seen enough derelict vessels to know when something felt wrong. But the massive colony transport before him was different because it should not have been here at all, floating dead in space, 30 light years from any mapped route. His crew of 4 moved through the airlock with practiced caution, and the emergency lights inside cast everything in red shadows that made the corridor look like the inside of a dying heart. And Jake led them deeper past frozen corridors and scattered belongings that told stories of panic and chaos. They found the cryo bay on Deck 7, and most of the pods were dark, their occupants long, dead from system failures, but one pod in the far corner still hummed with power, and its surface was covered in frost that sparkled under their flashlights. Jake wiped the viewport clean and his breath caught, because inside was a woman, and not just any woman, but someone who looked like she had been carved from moonlight itself, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow faintly, and silver hair that floated in the suspension fluid like silk in water, and her features were sharp and elegant in a way that made human beauty seem almost plain by comparison. Her pod displayed a name in alien script that his translator struggled with before settling on something close to Lily Summers, though he knew that was just an approximation. The bio readouts were still active and showed she was alive and stable, and had been asleep for over 200 years according to the pod logs, and Jake knew he should report this and wait for proper authorities. But the colony laws were clear about salvage rights, and finders keepers applied to more than just cargo. He initiated the wake sequence. The pod hissed and drained, and the woman inside began to stir, and her eyes opened, slowly revealing irises that shifted between violet and gold like a sunset caught in crystal, and she looked at him through the glass with confusion that quickly turned to something else entirely. The pod opened with a final hiss, and she sat up slowly, and her movements were graceful, despite 2 centuries of sleep. And she looked at Jake and his crew with those impossible eyes, and then she spoke in a voice that was musical and strange. The translator in his helmet clicked and processed and converted her words into something he could understand. She was hungry, not for food, though that would come later, but hungry in a way that made Jake take an involuntary step backward, because he recognized that look even across species lines, and it was the look of someone who had been alone for far too long. Her name was difficult to pronounce, so Lily would do, and she was the last survivor of a colony ship that had been attacked by raiders 200 years ago, and her family had been wealthy beyond measure and owned 3 entire star systems before everything fell apart. She had been put into emergency cryosleep by her personal guard, who had died defending the ship, and she had drifted alone while her pod kept her alive on backup power. And now she was awake, and the universe she knew was gone. Jake explained slowly, using simple words because his translator was not perfect, and he told her about salvage laws and about how she was technically his responsibility now, until they reached a station and could sort out her legal status. She listened with those shifting eyes, never leaving his face, and when he finished she smiled, and it was not a human smile because it showed too many teeth that were slightly too sharp. She asked him what he wanted as payment for her rescue. Jake said she owed him nothing because that was the right thing to say, but she laughed and it sounded like bells mixed with something lower and more dangerous. She explained that in her culture, debts were sacred, and she would not be free until the debt was paid. And she asked again what he wanted. He made the mistake of looking at her too long at the way her strange alien beauty seemed to pull at something deep in his chest, and she saw it and understood. She moved closer and her hand touched his arm, and her skin was cool but not cold, and she asked if he wanted her. Jake stammered something about professional boundaries and proper procedures, and taking her to a station where she could contact whatever remained of her family. But she was not listening anymore. She explained that she had been alone in darkness for 200 years and had dreamed of warmth and touch and life, and now she was awake, and the hunger was overwhelming. She asked again, but this time, it was not really a question. His crew had the good sense to return to the ship and give them privacy. Jake knew this was a bad idea on multiple levels because she was a refugee and he was her rescuer, and the power dynamic was all wrong. But she was insistent, and her culture had different rules, and she made it clear she wanted this. She moved with fluid grace that was almost predatory, and her cool hands explored him with curiosity and hunger, and when she kissed him it tasted like ozone and something sweet he could not name. Afterward, she lay against him, and her strange skin seemed to glow brighter in the darkness, and she told him stories about her old life and about parties on orbital palaces and art galleries that floated between stars and a family that had loved her. She cried, and her tears were silver, and Jake held her while she mourned everything she had lost. They stayed in the derelict for 3 days while his crew salvaged what they could, and Lily stayed close to Jake, always touching him as if she needed constant physical contact to remember she was alive. She learned about the new universe slowly and absorbed information with frightening speed. And she was brilliant in a way that reminded Jake she came from people who had built empires between stars. When they finally returned to his ship, she stood on the bridge and looked at the stars through the viewport, and Jake saw something change in her eyes. She turned to him and asked what he planned to do with her. He said the truth, which was that he would help her. However he could, but ultimately she was free to choose her own path. She smiled that too sharp smile and told him she had already chosen. She would stay with him and help him with his salvage work, and slowly rebuild what she had lost and perhaps create something new. Jake knew it was complicated and would cause problems, but he agreed because turning her away felt wrong. She kissed him again and whispered against his lips that she was still hungry and would be for a long time. The ship jumped to faster than light speeds and carried them toward the nearest station, and whatever future waited there. And Lily stood beside Jake with her hand in his and looked forward instead of back because the past was gone, but she was still alive, and that was enough.